So this presentation is going to focus on high rate 2 BSIQ, and I'm sure a lot of you have no idea what 2 BSIQ is, and that's fine. I'll go over that here in a little bit. So it's kind of high level stuff, and if some of the stuff goes over your head, don't worry about it. We can get into that a little bit later. I'm going to talk about the definition, of course, the origins of 2 BSIQ, kind of where it all started. I'm going to talk about how to train for it. We're going to talk a little bit about 2 BSIQ on phone, and then I'm going to touch just briefly on SO3R at the very end. Okay, so this is going to be kind of just like a generic description of what 2 BSIQ actually stands for. So 2 BSIQ actually means 2 bands synchronized interleaved QSOs. Now, I didn't come up with this term. This was actually something that was come up by Jose, CT1BOH. I was trying to make the term be something more simple, like dual CQ, but he really pushed the 2 BSIQ, and I think that's kind of the standard now. And the goal is obviously to run on 2 bands simultaneously at the same time. So you have 2 different pileups going at the same time. And the must-have, this is real simple. You have to have obviously 2 radios, and it's really important, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but there should be no interstation interference. So if you're transmitting on one band and you're getting noise on the other band while you're transmitting, that's going to completely throw off the 2 BSIQ. And what 2 BSIQ is not, it's not standard SO2R, and it's not just having 2 different pileups on 2 different bands. You're actually trying to interleave QSOs at the same time. So some guys will, be calling CQ on 20, work a few guys over here, and then they go to 15, work a few guys over here. That's not 2 BSIQ. That's something completely different. So these next couple of slides I actually stole from Jose, CT1BOH. He put out a really good talk last year, and if anybody's really, really interested in hardcore 2 BSIQ, I highly recommend that you guys actually watch his presentation. You can definitely watch that on the web. And he goes really, really into detail on exactly what all this stuff means, okay? So I'm gonna kind of talk about what his definition is. It's similar to mine, but it's much more complex. And so what he calls this is obviously a complex contest operating mode in a protocol synchronized way, which enables interleave 2 radio running on 2 bands to dramatically increase QSO rates. So what kind of rates are we talking about? And I'll get into that a little bit later as well, but I think the max rate for 2 BSIQ on CW we've determined is right around 400 or so, 400 Qs an hour. So obviously that's not something that's possible with just one radio. So being able to do 2 BSIQ is going to be a huge step in increasing your score. So in these little boxes, he talks about the 2 bands. So you have a SO2R setup, and then he talks about the synchronization and the protocols, and this bottom corner one here, you're basically fitting 2 Qs into 1 QSO time frame, and we'll go into more detail about that as well. So this one here, he again references the being able to run with no interstation interference. That's really key to being able to do 2 BSIQ properly. So again, he's talking about the SO2R setup. You need 2 radios, no interstation interference, and you need to be able to run on any 2 bands that are available to you. And then obviously this is standard for any contest. You only want to have 1 signal on the air, so you have to have a proper interlock so that you're not transmitting 2 signals on the air at once, because that would be against the rules. Okay, so here he's talking a little bit more about synchronization. So again, it's talking about what the synchronization is. So if you look down here at the bottom, you can see how he's spread it out. So whenever you're transmitting on radio 1, you want to be listening on radio 2. And then when you're transmitting on radio 2, now you're listening on radio 1. So it has to all be happening at the same time. Okay, now this one here, he kind of spells it out. So this top one up here is talking about just your standard operating. You have one CQ going, and so you have your standard contest exchange up there. Now, down here is the interleave part, and so you have the same thing happening on two different radios at the exact same time. Okay. Here is an important thing that we have to talk about when we're talking about BSIQ. It's never going to be perfect. You're going to have interruptions, and you have to figure out how to fix those interruptions. So down here, he's giving an example where you're trying to do the synchronization, and then you get somebody calling you with their call sign twice. Okay, that's always going to throw off the synchronization, and your pair moment has been breached at that point. So you have to be able to deal with that and figure out a way to continue with the 2BSIQ protocol. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail after this. So I'm going to talk about the origin of 2BSIQ. So where did all this start? Okay, it's been around for a long time, but it just recently started with the whole high rate stuff. Okay, back in 2013 or so, there was an operation by UT5UGR down in FM. He was operating as TO7A, and in that particular contest, he was actually doing some 2BSIQ. So he was running guys on both bands. He had extremely high rates at that time. I believe his top rate was around 290 or so, and that kind of raised a lot of eyebrows. Okay, one of the things that ended up happening was there was a lot of questions on. We just had to talk on integrity, right? So people were questioning, how is this even possible? People were saying, he must have had a second operator with him, And when I heard people saying that, I tended to believe that he was actually operating legitimately, and so I took it upon myself to try it out. And so what I ended up doing is I had two different versions of Morse Runner, and so I had one on two different computers, and I did it all together at the same time. I sat there for an hour without any other practice just to see what would happen, okay? And when I did that, I had roughly 300 QSOs for that 1 hour. So like, look, this is actually possible. So I tended to be on his side when it came to the 2BSIQ stuff. And so that was kind of like the controversy, because a lot of people were convinced that there's no way it's even humanly possible. And so once I figured out that it actually was, I really wanted to get my chance to actually try this. And so I had my first opportunity was operating as ZF2MJ in the CQ Worldwide 2015. And that was actually a really interesting time for me, because I'm one of those guys that's a really good operator, but I'm not a real technical guy, okay? So for me, putting a station together is not really my thing, but I was able to get into the situation down in ZF where I had a lot of people around me that were able to help me out. And when we go down to ZF, we put everything together from scratch. And so originally, for me, that was kind of a big deal. But I was able to do it. Just to give you an example of my skills, the first time that I ever soldered anything was about 2 weeks ago. Okay, so even though I've been a hand for 30 years, I've never actually built anything, but I feel pretty good because 2 weeks ago, me and my dad were putting up a VE3DO loop in the backyard, and I was out there soldering, so there's still hope for me. Anyway, so this here is so this is my setup down in ZF. So here we have the two big Icoms. So this is what I used in 2017. So we have the 7851s here, and then this particular year I had a 7300, and the 7300 was used as a third radio. We'll get more into detail about SO3R a little bit later, but this just so you can see kind of how I had that set up. And that year, I had SO3R, where the third radio was completely separate. I had a separate amp for it and everything. But that's the general setup there. There's not a lot of space on that table, but especially with those big radios, but we make it work. Now here is an example of the TI7W setup. He's another 2BSIQ guy, of course. Completely different strategy than what we do in ZF, but as you can see, any of this stuff can work. So They use the flex radios down there, and then they have the DJ controllers that control everything. This, to me, I don't think I could make this work. Like, it's way too complicated for me, but it definitely works for them. So whatever you need to do to get your setup working, there's lots of different options, of course. This is just the picture of what we use down in ZF as far as antennas go. So the big antenna down there is going to be the log periodic at 100 feet. And then we have additional antennas like the C31, the Pro 67. We have the 2-element 80 at 90 feet, which does really well from down there. And then, of course, the inverted VN160. Now, TI7W does something similar as far as having multiple antennas, so you can go out, have your signal spread out in multiple directions. That's also very important. So I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we decided to make some upgrades to the ZF1A shack in order to facilitate this. And this is all helping with 2 BSIQ as well, because we're able to spray in multiple directions at the same time on different bands, and again, without any station interference. So we have, quadplexers, triplexers, we have 4 stack matches for 10 through 40, and then we have the bandpass filters over here. I think this was the biggest upgrade that we were able to make down there without adding any more antennas, because now we can use all the antennas at the same time, whereas before we didn't have any of this stuff. So this was a huge improvement for us down there. So I talked a little bit about the 2015 being the first time I did 2 BSIQ. So that particular contest, and this was single op, I ended up with over 10,000 Qs, and the total Qs was 10,014 after lock checking. So that was the first time, and still the only time as of right now, that A1's been over 10,000 Qs on CW. So in the first implementation, I myself had over 8 hours of over 300 rate, and in the 4 years since then, over 27 hours of 300 plus rate. So I think between me and guys like Chris and Nate and for YDU, we've kind of proved that 2 BSIQ, again, is definitely possible, and the 300-hour rate barrier has been breached. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about training for 2 BSIQ. So the best thing you can do is get on the air. You have to practice a lot. Just to give you an idea, whenever we're starting to prepare for CQ Worldwide, we'll start our practice sessions in July. Okay, it takes a lot of time to get yourself mentally ready to be able to do this at high speed. So you have to start early if you want to start doing this. There's a couple different programs that you can use. RUFZ is one of those programs that not a lot of people use, but I actually like it. So let me explain what our RUFZ does. So basically, you start at one speed. You have people are calling you one at a time, and you type in the call sign, and that's it. So let's say you start at 40 words a minute. If you get the call sign correct, then the speed goes up. So it's a 42, and then it just keeps going up until you miss a call sign. If you miss a call sign, the speed starts going back down. So RUFZ is really going to push your limits on what you're able to do. So let's say if you're comfortable at 40 words a minute, but you can still copy some guys a little bit faster, this will kind of push you to actually do that, and it helps you increase your overall speed, okay? Like I said earlier, get on the air. That's always important. I'm not as active now as I used to be, but when I was a little bit younger, I would just get on and just work DX, especially we're talking mostly about CW here, so I would get on, work as many guys as I could. You want to improve your efficiency on being able to send CW, copy CW, and the best way is to do it on the air, okay? Now, as far as actual 2 BSIQ training, the absolute best is going to be DX log. DX log has Morse Runner built into it, and it has a training program where you can actually do 2 BSIQ and train with it right in the program. And I have to come to the conclusion that it's very lifelike. You have guys calling you on both sides, and some of them are lids, some of them, they'll call you twice, and that's something that does happen during the contest as well. So I can't think of anything that's more lifelike than DX log. And I think if anybody's really, truly wanting to try this, you should definitely consider that. And I think it's really important to understand that you're not going to start off by doing 2 BSIQ. I think you guys get that. It's something that's more advanced. So before you even think about 2 BSIQ, you know, you should improve your other skills first. So obviously you should be able to, you know, operate proficiently at SO3R. And we're talking about like maybe higher speeds, maybe, you know, get yourself up to about 40, 42 words a minute where you're comfortable. And then once you are proficient at SO3R, you know, standard SO2R is not easy either. So I think it's important to start with that before moving on to 2 BSIQ. So standard SO2R would be running on one band and just search and pouncing on the other. So I think it's important to be able to do that before jumping into 2 BSIQ. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more real quick about DX log. So if you guys are wanting to try this, these are the advanced settings that we use. So that'll be me and Chris and Nate. We try to mimic what real life activity is when we're operating down from the Caribbean. So we set you can set different levels as far as contest activity. You can go down to 1 all the way up to 9. So 1 would be, you know, one station calling you, never more than 1. 9 is just a giant pile up basically all the time, okay? And operating from the Caribbean, 9 is gonna be the most realistic because it can be pure bedlam down there. And when you're having it on 2 different radios at the same time, you wanna be able to be prepared for that. We also tend to just stick to 10-minute training sessions. We haven't found any benefit for doing anything longer than that. And usually what we do is we'll sit down 10 minutes a couple times a week just to get our brain more focused on it. The speed that we end up using is anywhere from like 48 to 52 words a minute is what we're finding is gonna be the best speed to get the highest rate. Obviously not everyone's able to do that, so if you want to go a little bit slower, that's fine. But these are the advanced settings that we found to be best for training for actual high-speed 2 BSIQ from the Caribbean. Okay, so when is training complete? All right. So you should be able to routinely get 300 Qs an hour through the DX log, okay? You should be able to have roughly the same number of Qs on each side. So what that means is, you know, you have 2 pile-ups going at the same time. If you're focusing just on one side and not so much on the other, so let's say you have 300 Qs, but you have, you know, 180 over here and 120 over here. Well, that's not really interleaving the QSOs properly. You want to have closer to 150 and 150 on each side, and that's how you know you've accomplished the actual interleaving of QSOs appropriately. So obviously, you know, we're mostly today talking about CQ Worldwide specifically, but you can all do this in much smaller contests as well, like NAQP. We found that to be a very effective tool in NAQP, being able to call CQ on both sides. And it's not as crazy as doing it from the Caribbean. So the rates are much slower, but it still will help increase your rate. And as it says up here, it is definitely difficult to try this on the air outside a contest because you're never going to get the proper syncing, so it just doesn't really work. So you know, you have to do it during a contest to actually do it properly. This is something that you guys can look at later on. I have a 10-minute YouTube video of one of the sessions that I did. So in this particular session, we had 80 Qs in the 10 minutes, so that would be a 420 hour. I believe the speed, it's kind of hard to read on here. I think it was 50 words a minute on that one. So this will be a good indication of what it actually sounds like on our side. And this is, you know, very similar to what it's going to sound like when we're operating from the DX side as well. It's probably going to be a little crazy to listen to it, but at least you can kind of get a sense of what the end goal is. You know, so this will be high level stuff, but if you want to take a look at this when you guys have some time, I think it's worthwhile. Okay, so we're going to talk a little about 2 BSIQ during lower rate periods. So even during, even when you don't have pileups on both sides, it can definitely still increase your rate overall. So getting the actual interleave of QSOs is not quite as important during these lower rate times, but it's still important because the thing that you want to understand with any kind of SO2R operating is your goal is going to be not letting the guy on the other side know that you're SO2R. You know, you don't want to leave people waiting more than they have to, because that's going to just upset the other operators, you know. So the goal should be to try as best as you can to not indicate that you're actually doing SO2R. That's going to be the hardest thing to actually accomplish. So during these periods, it's okay to send a little bit slower, because again, the interleaving is not quite as crucial, because you know you might be just calling CQ on the other radio for a while before someone actually calls you. You can also send the longer CQs in these situations as well. So here's some tips for operating 2 BSIQ. The whole goal is to never listen to your transmit audio, okay? Because whenever you're transmitting, you want to be listening to the other radio, basically. So you don't want to listen to what's coming out of your transmitter. That should be completely silent. The other thing that most people don't realize with this style of operating, you have to sign your call sign after every single QSO, okay? If you don't do this, then your interleave is completely messed up. Because while you're sending your call sign, theoretically, if you're doing this all correctly, somebody will be sending their call sign to you. So if you just send thank you after the contact, now you're listening to both radios at the same time, and that's not the goal. The goal is to have one radio at a time, and that way you can better copy the guys that are calling you. For the high-speed stuff that we're talking about, the speeds are generally between 40 and 52 words a minute. Now, some people think we're crazy for going 52 words a minute during the contest, and I would agree with you. But we have actually found that our highest rates were during those hours. You know, my highest rate currently was 387. That hour was doing 52 words a minute. So even though you might be scaring off a few of the guys, there's enough guys out there that are still going to call you. And for the super high rates, we found that 52 words a minute is going to be the max. You shouldn't go any faster than that. But that really helps interleave the QSOs. Now, if you're going to be doing a 48-hour contest from down there, the goal should be to operate a minimum of 45 hours of 2 BSIQ, okay? 2 BSIQ is really hard on your body, okay? It's really, really difficult, you know, and it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done, to be honest with you. The very first year that I did 2 BSIQ, which was the 2015 year that we mentioned, I really wasn't sure what to expect going in. And for that particular contest, I ended up doing about 25, 26 hours of 2 BSIQ, and the rest of the time was spent just doing regular SO2R or even sometimes just SO1R. And after that contest, you know, I went back and looked, and, you know, the rate obviously is always going to be less when you're not doing 2 BSIQ. And so my goal ever since then was to push it much harder, you know. And then if those remaining couple hours where you're not doing 2 BSIQ would be a good time to search and pounce for molts and stuff like that, okay? So we talked a little bit about operator health earlier, but let's get into a little bit more. So like I said, it's more taxing than any other kind of operating you're ever going to do, okay? Both mentally and physically even. You should aim to be in good health. So don't look at myself, but you know, guys like Chris, he's been really into health lately. That's really helped him out. For example, in this last CQ Worldwide, you know, Chris has been working out for actually several years now, and he was able to do the whole 48 hours, you know, no sweat. I am myself, I'm not super healthy, as you can tell, but I had a lot harder time myself doing the 48 hours this time. I think I ended up only doing about 44 hours, even though my goal was 48. It was just too much, you know, physical and mental fatigue, and I had to, at one point I just had to stop. I just couldn't do it anymore. Now, it's important to actually think about what you're going to be drinking and eating during these events. Any kind of contesting is true, but more so with 2 BSIQ. This here was my list for last year. I made this list up prior to going down there. Usually my wife comes down with me and she kind of handles the food, but this last year was the first time I went down by myself, so I had to try and figure out how to feed myself, right? So the things that are important are you want to have a lot of protein, okay? Now, this BCAA powder is something that, again, that Chris kind of turned me on to. It's something that a lot of weightlifters use. And basically what this is something that A lot of them will use after their workout and helps them recover more quickly, okay? And so what we've discovered is it does help us out during the contest. So basically I would have one of these every 8 hours. It's just powder you put in a glass of water. And then after 8 hours, you have the next one. And I started using this for the first time in 2017, and that particular contest, it really did feel like I was more mentally prepared than I was in the past. So I'm not going to say that everyone should go out and use this stuff. You know, it's probably not for everyone, but it's just something to think about. There's all kinds of different things that you can do to prepare yourself better for the operating event. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about 2BSIQ on phone. 2BSIQ on phone is 10 times harder than on CW, okay? The reason for that is you have to physically speak when you're working guys. Now, the key on CW is not actually listening to your transmit audio, right? Well, when you're talking, you have to kind of listen to yourself. So that's going to throw off your interleave. So let's see here. Yeah, because when you're running on one radio, you can run super fast on phone. I think the top rates are like 450 would be the top rate on phone for one radio. But those are going to be not signing your call sign every QSO, talking really quickly. When it comes to 2BSIQ, unfortunately, you have to kind of slow everything down if you want to do it properly. So what I found is the top rates on phone for 2BSIQ are actually going to be lower than your top single radio rate, okay? I think there is some hope for 2BSIQ on phone going forward. There's been a lot of talk about getting better at having the computer do the voice for you. It's been possible for many years now for it to be done, but the problem is you have that computerized voice that turns off a lot of operators when they hear you. So when they hear some computer talking to you, they're like, I don't want to work this guy, right? So that's kind of the state that we're in now. I think if we can get it a little bit better to where it's your actual own voice that's going through the air, where you don't have to actually say the call signs in the report and all that stuff, then you can actually start interleaving a little bit better. I think the rates will go up at that point. But as of right now, 2BSIQ on phone is extremely difficult. So we talked about some of this already, but these are the theoretical max and the current max Qs on each mode. So right now on CW, the highest hour that recorded so far is 387. I really do feel that 400 is possible, and I think we're going to get there soon. It's going to be happening at one point because both Chris and I have had actually 200 Qs on one of the radios at one point. Now, so that means that if you're having the 200 Qs on one side, you should be able to theoretically have the 200 Qs on the other side as well, as long as the pileup behaves correctly. So I think within the next year or two, with the conditions getting a little bit better, we will finally hit that 400 mark on CW. Now for one radio on CW, I think the max QSO rate, I couldn't find exactly what it is, but it's like 275, 280, something like that. That's about where it's at right now. I think that can go up a little bit more as well, depending on the situation. I think it was ARRL CW last year, where the first half hour I had 150 Qs. Now the rate went down after that, but I think 300 would be the absolute max on CW. Now here's where it gets a little interesting. So the max right now on 2BSIQ phone was 395. I did that from EA8. And then I think, again, the theoretical max is going to be about 410, about the same on CW, okay? Now, the thing that's interesting to me is that this SO3R top rate is 470 right now. So again, you'd think it would add to your QSOs, but it really doesn't. I mean, during your slow periods, it's definitely going to help you on phone, but during the real quick periods, sometimes you're better off just being on the one radio. It's completely different than CW. Okay, let's talk a little bit about SO3R. So why did I decide to go with SO3R? So I had done the 2BSIQ from ZF1A for a couple of years, and the thing that I felt was missing was the chance to work more multipliers, okay? And so my decision was to add in the third radio, and the third radio would just be for search and pounce. Okay. So basically, the strategy is you're still going to have your two BSIQ going exactly like it was before. So you're going to have, whenever you're transmitting on the left side, you're going to listen on the right side, and vice versa. And then the third radio, the way that you can differentiate it in your headphones is the third radio is now going to be always in both ears at the same time. So you have three different streams coming into your headphones now. Okay. So now you can kind of separate them a little bit, right? Now, we're not talking about the 380 hours when we're doing this, so that would never work. But there are, middle of the night hours where we're working maybe 100, 150 Qs an hour with the two BSIQ, so it's much slower at that point, and that's when the third radio comes into play. So we're talking about maybe 5, maybe 10 hours at the most where the third radio would be used. Now, it would be especially important on band like 160. And also maybe like 10 meters. Like the last several years, 10's been real iffy, of course. And so having that third radio parked on 10 meters is something that helps your score because whenever somebody pops on, you can see it on your scope and you go work the guy and that kind of thing, okay? So I kind of talked about this a little bit, but there's also, so all this technology stuff, so I have a guy that helps me out, K6AM. Anytime that I have some crazy idea, I tell him about it and he builds it for me. So he built the third radio box for me so I can add the audio into my regular switch. And then it also has a bit bop switch, so both in phase and both out of phase. And so sometimes, depending on the situation, you might want to just hear the audio just a little bit differently. So being able to switch it up actually will potentially help you hear guys on that third radio, okay? Now, when it comes to the lockout box, the way that we've decided to implement that is that the third radio should always win. So what that means is whenever you find somebody on that third radio, it's super important that you actually work them at that point. So if you are calling the guy, it'll trump anything else that you're doing. So if you're calling CQ on another radio, it automatically just cuts it off because there's so few SO3R Qs to be made. You want to make sure that it takes the most important. So I know this is going to be hard to see up here, but this is the configuration that I used in 2018. So you have to remember, like I said before, I'm not a technical guy, but I have to physically set the station up from scratch. So this is the diagram that we used. Again, not created by me. I can never do something like this. But K6AM was able to create this for me. And so last year, I did it a little bit differently than 2017. So last year, what I did was the third radio, which is this one up here, was actually shared with Radio 1. And so I was only able to use the third radio as an in-band station, okay? I've determined after that contest last year that that's not the correct strategy. There was just too much QRM, and it made it too difficult to actually find guys on that third radio. So I think I'm gonna, in the future, go back to what I did the year before, which was a completely separate station where it can be operated on a different band. So, all right, so here are some important links, of course. I highly recommend this CTU and BOH presentation as well. So again, if you're really interested in 2 BSIQ, please watch that one, okay? So these are some other things. I've put up some videos with audio on the web, on YouTube, so that you can actually hear what I'm hearing from down there. And then same with Jose. Jose did the same thing. I did post a video on phone. Unfortunately, there's no audio on that one. You can hear me talking, but you can't hear the stations. So hopefully in the next couple of years, I'll be able to get something up that actually you can hear it. And then this is that DX log practice session that I talked about. Let's see where we're at here. Okay. I just wanted to, we still have some time left here. I'm gonna actually call my buddy up here, Tim, N6WIN. I wanted him to just talk briefly to you guys about how he has progressed over the last 3 or 4 years. When I first started working with him 3 or 4 years ago, he wasn't really much into CW. He knew it, but he wasn't all that great at it. And since that time, he's really picked up his speed. He is now doing SO3R proficiently, and he's just started his road onto 2 BSIQ. So he'll be doing 2 BSIQ in the CWTs and stuff like that. I think it might be good to hear from him as somebody who's been in your shoes not too long ago, and I helped him improve his skills. So I'm just going to have him talk just for a couple minutes about what he found useful and what he thinks would be good for you guys to know as well. So if you want to come up, this is Tim, N6WIN.
Guys, Tim, N6WIN. I think like a lot of people, career, family, etc., has caused different breaks in my ham radio career. And so at Dan's son's birthday party, he had just gotten a phone call from me. I said, hey, I had a medical condition. I had to retire early. I have to stop my competitive field of firearms. But I haven't lost that competitive spark. Would you be willing to help me out with figuring out what all has changed in ham radio in the last 6 years? This is about 2017. And help me out with training. What do I do? How do I get back into this and really get that competitive feel again? So Dan suggested a lot, which is already in the slide. And he basically said, get yourself a copy of DX Log, start doing the 2 BSIQ Morse Runner. Of course, before that, do it on one side only. Get into Rough C, XP, start getting those calls down, challenge yourself, and it'll keep throwing higher speeds at you as you get them correct. And also another key thing he said, learn your station, learn how to run those 2 computers that we've set up at your house again, and get into those CWTs every week. Now that you're retired, Tim, what else are you going to do? So I listened to him, and I thought, oh man, this is really daunting. It's going to be very hard, and it is. It's hard. But as the proficiency came back with one radio, I made sure to listen to my friend Dan and okay, man, I got to push this. I got to start working that second radio. So I started with the search and pounce. All right, I'm doing SO3R. This isn't so bad. It's coming back, or I'm learning it. Then the brand new thing was really 2 BSIQ. And I remember trying it a little bit, working with Dan at W6YI. We do multi-ops and stuff down there in San Diego. And in the middle of the night, they would trust a guy like me with, hey, don't mess anything up. Don't break an amplifier. We'll wake up in the morning. Well, that gave me that opportunity to try out 2 BSIQ. And sure enough, oh man, a guy that's not doing 380 hours can actually do this and improve during those slow hours his skills that he may not already have at the top level. So the same thing's now occurring down at ZF. I'll get the middle of the night hours. During the prime time, if I'm lucky to get a slot with where I'm at, it's basically one radio. You got to be proficient on that one radio. But when the guys start turning in for the middle of the night, it becomes that opportunity to interleave QSOs on 2 different radios in the middle of the night. And I think that that's an important place to kind of learn it myself as the newbie because it gives me that opportunity to try it out, verify it works. And you might be taking that 30 rate middle of the night hour and turning it into a 50, a 70, an 80 rate hour. And now you've got progress over some of the other guys and girls that, maybe they're not willing to try this out yet. So it definitely improves your score, your overall QSOs. You might even have a molt call you on that second radio that, he or she is just searching the band looking for a signal to work. And if you're not out there calling CQ, you may never elicit that call. So it's definitely helped out a lot. All of the stuff in this slide is definitely in the slides for training. I have found to work very well. It does cause some aggravation at first, but if you stick with the suggested training routines that Dan has laid out, I think one of the biggest testaments for me is that during our state QSO party, the California QSO party, Dan was willing to stay home at his dad's station, which needed some repair. Without a lot of work going into it, we had very similar stations, and I challenged Dan, hey, what if you didn't go to a big station this year? What could happen? And I knew I was going to get my butt kicked. It's Dan, right? But because of what he sent out to me as the challenge of training, I was able to get on 2 different radios, run CQing or 2 BSIQ on 2 radios, and end of the day, the scores, I lost. But it was a lot closer than I ever hoped to do. And I think it was a testament to what my friend said, hey, Get out there, do DX log doing the 2 sides, get on rough ZXP, challenge yourself to do that on a frequent basis. He might only have to do it 2 times a week. I'm doing it every day when I'm really training. Yeah, I need to catch up. But, and get in those CWTs, because now you're learning your station. You know what's broken. You know how to do the actual physical side of 2 radios. And it really does pay off. All right, buddy.
Yeah, and that CQP, like you mentioned, the scores were actually really close. There was one mistake he made. He was on 40 foam when he should have been on 40 CW. If it wasn't for that, he would have beat me. So I think we're going to go head-to-head again this year. We still have some time, but I am all done with my talk. Who has some questions? Come on up. Steve? I can probably hear you, I guess. I guess. I don't know. We'll try this. What you got?
Anyway, actually, Tim went where I wanted to go. I mean, I've watched the videos and all that.
Yep.
Skill-wise, I think I can do it. But we're in KL7. It's going to be a while before it would be of much utility there. But the question is how, one of the things we struggle sometimes on the monitors for CW, and this would be a handy-dandy tool to use to sort of expand the use of an operator such as myself,
Yes.
in the middle of the night when it happens. So how do we implement this successfully in a multi-op environment? Because, it is both standard SOP. As it is, I've found, I noticed you use beam test as well. I found it's something of a pain in the rear to implement SO3R at a single position within the multi-op environment. How do you do that and then implement this over it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually do this quite a bit, both at W6YI and down at ZF1A, where we're doing a multi-op. And normally you want to have 2 guys a minimum at a multi-single operating at the same time. Well, if it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and the rates are really slow, we just tell the other guy to go to bed. So one of us will be there operating both radios at the same time. Now, it only works when the rates are slow. If you have a high rate time at a multi-op, you don't want to just have the one guy handling that. But if you're in middle of the night and you only have 40 and 80 open and you're working 30, 40 guys on each radio, it's definitely doable. You don't have to worry so much about interleaving and you don't even have to worry about interlocks or anything at that point. You technically can transmit at the same time if you're doing like a multi-tube, but it will add to your score if you have the one guy operating on both radios. You just, you call the CQ on both sides and, instead of having your 30 an hour rate on the one radio, you can implement it into the second radio where now your rate's going to go up as well. So it's definitely something that you can do in the multi-op environment. And, like you were saying, in your situation, let's say you're doing single op and you're in Alaska, you only have the one band open and it's a real, poor opening on the second band. Well, the beauty of 2 BSIQ is you can still run on that open band and you can still call a bunch of CQs on the marginal band. And it's not going to bring your score down because at least you're still getting the guys from the first radio. And then on the second radio, if somebody calls you, a lot of times that's just going to be a multiplier. And I think that would be beneficial there as well. Does that help you out a little bit, Steve?
That can solve a lot of
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
You mentioned bit bop. Is that antennas or something else?
No, so the bit bop is going to be the actual audio coming into your headphone switch. So I don't know the details behind it. That's more technical than I can get. But basically, when you throw the switch, it'll change the orientation of the audio in your headset. Okay, and so sometimes it helps changing the orientation of what you're hearing, especially when you have 3 radios coming in at the same time. Maybe at this point, this orientation is better versus that orientation. I don't know. I wish I could tell you how it actually works. That I don't know, but yeah, it's a spatial thing, exactly. Great question. So yes, for the third radio, I'm actually using the third computer, right? So I personally, when I'm doing SO2R, regular 2 BSIQ, I do it with 2 computers. So when I'm doing the third radio, I do add in a third computer as well. It gets super complicated. Yes, that's exactly. So I'm typing on 3 things at once. It gets a little complicated, but that's the current setup down there is with the 3. Yes.
Can you tell me a bit about your strategies for recovering when somebody sends their call sign twice,
Yeah.
or you have to ask for a fill or something like that?
Right. So, like I said earlier, your main goal is to not let people know that you're doing SO2R, right? That's the goal. But when somebody is going to call you twice, that's going to be that one time where you might have to make them wait a little bit because they've missed their opportunity for you to respond to them. And at that point, when they're sending the call the second time, now you're already off doing something else, okay? And so that person, unfortunately, is just going to have to wait until you have the opportunity to come back to them. So that's going to be one of those times where there's just nothing you can really do, but they're going to have to wait until you have the chance to get back. It's not going to be a long time, but you're going to have that delay. It's going to be a few seconds, and the worst part is if they start calling again, and then you're really screwed at that point. But Steve, one more. Yeah.
If you're running at 48 to 52, very few people search and pounce at that rate. How do you keep sync for that?
Okay, so he's asking how do you keep sync at 48 or 52. So a lot of the guys that are calling, pretty much none of them call me at that speed, right? They're all going to call me at whatever speed they're comfortable with, like 30 or whatever. But that's why we kind of have that built in to the protocol, okay? So when you're sending the 52 words a minute, it actually does help you sync even when they're calling slower. Because we're understanding that they're going to call slower. So that's all kind of built in, okay? So even though we're sending faster than they are, it all kind of works out in the end, even if they're sending at the slower speed. Yes? So when I'm doing regular 2 BSIQ, I do have the same pitch in both radios, okay? The only time that I change anything is when I add in that third radio. That's when it gets real confusing. On the third radio, you might change the pitch a little bit. I found that to help as well. But just regular 2 BSIQ, it's the same on both sides. Because basically, if you're doing it correctly, you're only listening to one at a time. So it doesn't matter if the pitch is the same, because you're not listening to them both at the same time, theoretically. Dan?
Yeah, the block diagram of the 2 BSIQ.
Yep.
Is that available anywhere?
Yes.
For
yes.
study?
Yes, it is. It's available in the book, I think, and then I can also get you a copy of the presentation. That's for anybody in here as well. I can send you the presentation, no problem at all. So just shoot me an email and we can get that to you. Yes. Yep. Yeah, so basically, we don't train with SO2R with RFC though. So that would be only with Morse Runner, okay? So with Morse Runner, at least the one that's built into DXlog, you can set up the scenarios exactly like I described how I do my on-the-air operating. So when you're transmitting over on this side, you're not actually hearing what you're sending, okay? So now, while you're transmitting, all you hear in both ears at this point is what's happening over on this side, okay? So it's identical to what you would do on the air as well. But that would be just with Morse Runner. As far as RFC goes, that would just be a single training session just for one radio. Yes?
Maybe I misheard what you just said, but it sounded like there are times when you're not listening to a radio just on one ear or the other. You're hearing like radio one on both ears.
Okay, yeah, I didn't really go into that too much. That's a great question. So he was asking about how I'm listening to the audio. So the way that we have our audio switch set up down there in ZF, so anytime that you're transmitting, so let's say I'm on radio 1, I'm calling CQ over here. At that point, I'm hearing radio 2 in both ears, okay? And then once I'm done transmitting over here, then it gets split at that point. So now I'm hearing radio 1 and radio 2 in just those 2 ears. And then when I start transmitting over here, now I'm hearing radio 1 in both ears, okay? And that we found to be beneficial. The very first time I did it down there in ZF, I did it just like you're describing the first time, where I'm always left ear, left radio, right ear, right radio. And we determined that's a lot harder to do for a long period of time.
So a follow-up, and so how are you knowing what you're hearing, which radio you're hearing on, from audio windows or something?
Yeah, so I have two computers going, and then my lockout box, it has a big red light on it, so it's indicating so on each radio. So I have a big red light over here, a big red light over here as well. So I can, just by visually looking in front of me, I can tell, okay, this radio is transmitting right now. Yeah, exactly, and you're pretty much going back and forth anyway, so it's pretty easy to follow what you need to do at that point. Yeah. Yes. So are you talking about for training? No. So I personally don't like to have the computer do anything automatically for me. I prefer to actually hit the button myself, because I don't want it to screw me up by sending when I don't want it to. Like I don't ever turn on the auto CQ feature. Anything that I'm going to do, I'm actually going to push the button to actually do it myself. Any other questions? Yes.
What logging program do you use for the actual operating?
Currently, I'm using WinTest. I am contemplating going over to DXlog as well. DXlog is pretty similar. The nice thing about DXlog is they have a better way to implement two radios into one computer. So you can have, and I think N1MM is similar. I'm just not really familiar with N1MM, but basically with DXlog, you can have two separate entry windows with two separate computers going to the same computer. And that's how we do the training anyway. And I've determined that might be the way to go, especially if I'm going to be adding in another radio. Because at that point, now we only need two computers instead of three. We still need 3 keyboards, but it'll help a little bit if we go to the DXlog, because I think it's much more smoother than WinTest in that regard. But right now we're using WinTest. Yes? No, I don't think there's any video out there yet where I'm actually doing SO3R. All the videos that I have are during the high rate 2 BSIQ stuff. And I don't have anything currently for the portions where I'm doing SO3R. But that is something that I plan on doing this year when I'm down there, is trying to figure out a way to document that as well, because I think that would be interesting for people to listen to. Yeah, that's going to be one thing. It's not really anything you can train for. And speaking of not being able to train, I didn't really go into this before, but you can't really train for 2 BSIQ on phone either. There's no program out there where you can actually train for that, whereas on CW it's much easier to train. Yes?
And is it possible to make the jump from SO3R right to 2 BSIQ without mastering SO2R?
I don't recommend that, but it's something you can definitely try. Before you do anything, I would suggest definitely not doing it on the air, right? But I would definitely see how you do with the training. If it's something that you feel comfortable with while you're doing the training with DXlog, then maybe that's something that you can do. I feel that it's probably better suited to master the other things first, but that's just how I did it. So I think as long as you you don't want to sound like a lid on the radio, right? So that's why I say don't try it on the radio first, but if you're comfortable with the training of doing the 2 BSIQ and you feel good about it, in a contest like NAQP, right? The rates are not going to be that high. Maybe that would be a good opportunity to do it where you don't have to master SO2R.
The Wednesday CWTs are a great time.
Yes.
3 one-hour sessions to practice.
Exactly. I think CWT is a great opportunity. Yes.
Yeah, follow up on the macro question.
Yeah.
You're literally saying you push, F1, then F2, then F3, and then
Correct.
keyboard?
Yes. Yes. And you can you can see that in the video too if you're interested. Yeah. Yes.
In the middle of the night, if you're at a multi and you decide to go to changing from an operator on each band or even 2 on each band to one person, how do you do the switching in the audio setup for that? Is there some way I can find out more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So down at W6YI, we have the audio switching already set up so that Yeah, so we're anticipating that happening. So we can route the audio from any of the 3 radios we have down there, so that one guy can listen to each side if they need to. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email, and I'll talk to John, and we'll get you how to get that set up. Because it's important. You can go old school and throw 2 headphones on at the same time, but that's not really efficient. So I think no, it doesn't exactly. So.
Are you straight away into sequence, or does it take time when you start running the contest to get into the right sequence?
No, we start right away. And it was kind of funny. The very first time that I did this, 2015, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I did all the practice, so I felt comfortable doing it. But when I started out that particular contest, I was on 20 running guys, and I was trying to call guys on 15. Okay, and this is at 00 Zulu. So in ZF, that's the evening time. I thought I might be able to get a few mults on 15, so that was my strategy at the very beginning. Well, I sat there and I called all these guys on 15, and nobody was able to come back to me for whatever reason. So at that point, I'm 10 minutes in. I'm like, what do I do? So I put that radio on 40, just hit CQ, and I was off to the races after that. And ever since that discovery, we find that the highest rate hours are going to be in the first 2 to 3 hours of the contest. Like the 387 hour, I believe, was in the first 2 hours. I had a 385 hour last year in the first 3 hours. So we definitely start the ball rolling with the 2 BSIQ right at the very beginning. Any other questions? Sweepstakes is tough. It's definitely doable because, especially when you're on Sunday, when you're really not working a lot of guys. I know some of the top operators like N2IC, they've found 2 BSIQ to be beneficial. Now, it's not so much interleaving at that point versus having 2 signals on the 2 different bands. So you're gonna send much slower because you're trying to attract those guys. So you're not super concerned about the whole interleaving part of it, but it's something that would be very helpful in sweepstakes as well.
So what's the practical difference in that case between, say, dual CQs and BSIQ?
Yeah, so in that situation, it would be more in the line of dueling CQs. Now, if you have 2 guys calling you at the same time, you can still do actual 2 BSIQ at that point. But on sweepstakes on Sunday, how often does that happen? Not very often. So it's more like dueling CQs at that point, yeah. All right, I think that's it for today. So thank you for showing up. Appreciate it.